We saw just about everything this Imsa season. From an incredible photo finish at the Rolex 24, to critical mistakes in the closing minutes of races, as well as a championship that went down to the very last race of the season. Let's take a look back at all the races from the 2023 season and give them a rating from great to just nah. Now, if you've never seen a tier list like this before, basically what we're going to be doing is placing all of the races from the 2023 season into one of 5 buckets. Great, good, solid, meh, and just nah. Now, hopefully all of those are pretty self-explanatory. And I'm just going to be ranking these purely based off what I thought when the race was all said and done. Alright, let's kick off with the season opener, shall we? Alright, so the Rolex 24, man, the season started off so strong. You had, of course, the debut of the GTPs. We didn't really see all that much reliability issues that we thought we were going to see coming into the season. And of course, who could forget about that LMP2 finish? That was about as close as you could possibly get there at the end. LMP3 was kind of, it was a war of attrition. I mean, we only saw one car finish on the lead lap, and I think it was a 12-lap gap from first to second. So that maybe it brings it down a little bit, but you counter that with GTD Pro. There is always some exceptional racing that's going on there, and GTD as well. GTD, we saw so many different manufacturers leading at various points of the race. I think there's really only one clear slot to put the Rolex into, and that's into the great category. I don't think that you could ask for a better start to the season than you did with the 2023 Rolex 24. It was pretty much as advertised. Like I said, we saw so many great battles, and I think it's got to be in the great tier. Now, next up is the Mobil 1 12 Hours of Sebring. And you go back to back with 2 of the biggest races on the calendar here. You look back on it, and the real thing that sticks out is the big one, right? Late in the race, we have the GTP leaders that are colliding. I personally hated to see the race end that way. It was disappointing to see so many of those top cars taken out. We didn't really get that good battle that was kind of shaping up to be in the end. Of course, there were also plenty of LMP3 issues. Right off the bat, there was an LMP3 that spun in turn 1 of lap 1. Thankfully, nobody got caught up, but one of the infamous incidents from that race was the LMP3 that rammed into the back of the Porsche GTP under full course yellow conditions. One of the most ridiculous things that you'll ever see. That certainly leaves a pretty sour taste in your mouth, but I think overall we saw lots of, there was so much going on. There was strategy playing out. There was great racing on track. It's really unfortunate that it finished in the way that it did, kind of with that big accident. So I think for now, I'm gonna put Sebring in the good category. This one's tough for me. I might have to come back and revisit this one. I don't know if I like that, but we're gonna leave it in good for now. Geez, I'm trying to find Long Beach on this list in the dark background, but we found it. Black on black is pretty hard to read. Thankfully, there's a little orange flag there that we were able to catch. But we headed to Long Beach, and we kind of had more carnage right off the bat, and it was a little bit concerning, I'm not gonna lie. You saw the 0-1 spin out, whether it was cold tires, the marbles, a combination of both, and we had a very early full course yellow. But really after that, things settled down, got into a groove. We had the classic Long Beach hairpin spin, but thankfully there wasn't too many cars that got caught up in it in a really serious manner. And as a result of that, with there being no real full course yellows in the middle stint of that race, we really got to see some nice strategy play out, which that certainly makes it very enjoyable to watch. You get to see some nice strategy. There was some good racing along the way as well. And of course, some of that strategy that did get to play out was with the Porsches double stinting tires, and could Wayne Taylor Racing and could they catch up and pass them? Could the BMW, who was also close on their tail, could they catch them? And you got to see the number 7 do a really good job of just hard defending, not reckless defending, but just good good defending to keep the number 10 behind them for enough time before they eventually got past and charged towards the sister number 6 Porsche. But then the sour kind of taste in your mouth, I feel like, comes right at the end of this race, where whether it was a mistake, whether it was just over aggression, and Ricky Taylor put the number 10 in the wall in turn 1 on that. If it wasn't the final lap, it was like the final 2 minutes of the race. It was second last lap or whatever, going for the lead, and it was like, oh no, we don't want to. I don't want to see a race end like that. I really wanted to see that battle play out until the end, and we just kind of got robbed of that great finish. So I'm going to put the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach in the good tier for now. I definitely think that was a step above Sebring, though, so I might move Sebring down to solid for now. We'll see if that actually continues to fall further as we go on. Before we continue though, in case you missed it, last week we launched some Off in the S's merch. There's hoodies, hats, shirts, stickers to choose from, and they're all 15% off until December 7th. You can check that out by clicking the link in the description. Alright, WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. Time for round 4 of the championship, and this was actually, it started off positive because this was the first time we got to see a customer GTP entry on the grid. And of course, we saw some not ideal incidents, I would say, in the early part of the race. You'll recall the Porsche GTP just body slammed the Aston Martin, the poor Andretti Aston Martin off track, and kind of a scary collision with the pit entry barrier. Thankfully, driver was okay in that, but there was quite a number of penalties over the course of this race and full course yellows for accidents. We never really got a great groove going, and for that reason, I'm gonna put Laguna Seca in the meh category. It was kind of mediocre overall, and I wish we would have got a little bit more green flag running and not had as many interruptions as we did during that race. Next up, we had the Sailing 6 Hours of the Glen, and you know, I might be a little bit biased because I was at the race, but you know, I think it was a pretty solid weekend overall. Of course, we did have some rain that hampered qualifying, and we didn't get to see those GTP cars go out. We saw some silly mistakes early on in the going here. Number 24 BMW with a spin coming off of turn 1, and then some interesting cutting across the track behavior right after that. We also saw a bit of a tangle with some LMP2 competitors. And I mean, we couldn't talk about silly incidents without talking about this LMP3 incident that took out a couple of the top GT cars at the time that it occurred. So, you know, maybe it's not as good as maybe my bias is showing through. So let's take it down a notch here. But we did see the second half of this race produce some incredible racing. In fact, 4 of the classes had some great battles going on, maybe a little bit of argy-bargy going on at various times, but overall pretty clean. But when it came down to the end of this race, we saw a great battle unfold between a Porsche and a BMW. Porsche quickly closing in on the BMW, and ultimately we were able to see the number 6 Porsche make a great pass in traffic to take the lead. Alright, you know, this was pretty good. Heck, I might even call it great at this point. The back half of this race was really great. Now, unfortunately, we had an incident in the closing minutes here, a pretty wild wreck for Turner Motorsports that brought out the full course yellow, but I think the real thing that brings this race just back down a notch from being truly a great race was what we learned with post-race inspection. Now, unfortunately, the number 6 Porsche was moved to the back of the GTP class in that post-race inspection for excessive wear on their skid plate, and you know, again, that kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in your mouth. You didn't get to see the car that crossed the finish line first actually take that win, so for that, I think it still is a very deserving good race this season. Next up, we have Mosport, or CTMP. Alright, let's just go and start this off in the great category. I mean, it's Canada, right? In case you don't know, I am Canadian. Alright, for real though, this was a race and a weekend that was dominated by Acura. We didn't really see a whole lot of passing take place either. There was lots of running nose to tail, even in the GT classes. And then it kind of turned into a bit of a messy race, especially in the back half of this one. We saw a huge wreck in the GTD Pro class where the number 23 Aston Martin was dumped by the number 79 Mercedes. They went into the wall really hard. Actually, pretty sure they totaled that chassis in this incident. And then not too long after, we saw the number 24 almost crash into the track vehicles that were going around to sweep the track under full course yellow conditions. And then again at the end, there was another silly GTP crash where I think it was the number 24 BMW that again kind of body slammed the 0-1 off the track on the Mario Andretti straightaway. Pretty scary incident here as well. The 0-1 just went really hard into the tires. Again, thankfully everybody was okay, but just a messy race overall. We didn't really get to see any great battles develop, and Acura kind of ran away with it in GTP. Honestly, I think the only saving grace here might have been the LMP3 battle, which is kind of weird to say. They did have they had a really nice battle that was going on in that class throughout the race, and I think overall, I think this was just kind of a meh race, a mediocre race, not the worst race I've ever seen. It wasn't great though, I don't think. Alright, next up we have Lime Rock and the Northeast Grand Prix. So one of only 2 GT only races on the Imsa calendar last year. And it is an absolutely beautiful track. One of, if not the nicest scenery tracks that we have on the entire Imsa calendar. Unfortunately, there was just no passing that could take place. It's such a tight track, it's really flowing. There's only really one great passing opportunity. I wouldn't even call it a great passing opportunity into turn 1, but we didn't even get to see some great strategy unfold with this one either. There was a full course yellow that took place about 40 minutes into the race as driver changes were taking place. And then there was another full course yellow with about an hour to go, so we didn't really get to see any team's creative strategies come into play here because everybody was just boxing at the 40-minute mark. They were boxing at the hour and 40 mark, and they could make it to the 2-hour and 40-minute mark of the race without any issues. There was no creative strategy that we even got to see unfold. Now, it should be said, there were a couple of nice charges through the pack in the back half of the race by a couple of Porsches, but overall, at the end of the day, there weren't too many great battles here, and this is going to be the first race that I put in the nah category. Like, I like Lime Rock. I think it's a beautiful track, but we just didn't get to see any great racing unfold here. Just, again, lots of nose to tail racing, and there was no pit strategy that I think we got to see unfold. Now, we followed up Lime Rock with a trip to Road America. Again, we have another dark logo on dark background, so it's a little bit difficult to see. But this is a race that truly signaled some troubles at the time for the championship contenders. We saw the number 25 BMW go off before the green flag even fell. The number 6 Porsche had a flat tire in this one as well. But overall, unlike kind of the last 2 races that we just talked about, it was a clean race. We got to see strategy unfold, and we also got to see some pretty darn good overtaking take place here. So I'm not going to fault it too much for that. We saw Blomqvist make a great charge in the back half of this race as well, come from, I think it was about 10 seconds back, and was really there, really putting some serious pressure on at the end of this race. Although the 7 just kind of dominated this race. There wasn't really a battle for them except at the very end. And then there was a great battle in the GT ranks as well, with the 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin and the number 3 Corvette. They had a great battle back and forth that went right down to the final pit stop. Unfortunately, the Corvette got a penalty on that final pit stop, which again kind of robbed us of that great battle. And then we also saw at the end of the GT race, a couple cars have to come in. They rolled the dice on some strategy. We're hoping for a late safety car, full course yellow, but they just didn't get it, so they had to come in and box. I think I'm gonna put Road America. Man, it's difficult. I think you could put it in the great bucket, but I want to put it in the good bucket. We never really got to see the 60 and Tom Blomqvist actually get to the back bumper of the 7 and really put that serious pressure on for the win. So I think if that had taken place, then we could call this a truly great race. But I think this is very much a good race. Man, we're flying through this here. The next round was the final GT only round of the season at VIR. And this was an interesting one as well. It wasn't messy per se. We did see a couple really big hits here. One for a Porsche and then another for the Forte Racing Lamborghini, who had some technical issues that caused them to go off hard into the barriers. But as that was taking place, we saw some great battles unfolding here. We saw the 14, the 3, and the number 1, Paul Miller Racing, a GTD entry. They were duking it out with the pros in this one, and they would go at it for some time here before on the final round of pit stops, we would see Corvette overtake the number 14 Vassar Sullivan after they had a little bit of a stall on pit lane that ultimately cost them a few seconds of time, and ultimately it cost them the lead. And then in GTD, there was some battling that was taking place in this one. We saw a pretty good battle towards the end with the Windward Mercedes and the Turner Motorsports BMW duking it out for that final position on the podium. But it was an absolute runaway for the win in that class. And Paul Miller Racing picking up yet another victory on the season. You know, so for that, I don't think it's up there with, you know, Road America and races like that, but I also think it was definitely better than we saw at CTMP and Laguna Seca. I think this lands pretty nicely in the solid category. We did see some good battles that we can look back on, and we did see some strategy come into play as well, but I don't think it's really going to be all that memorable at the end of the season. All right, we're down to the final 2 races of the season now, the championship deciders. Everything's on the line in these, and we're going to Indy. We're going back to Indy for the first time since, you know, early in the 2010s. You know, surely it's going to put on a solid race, right? And I think it was, for the most part, fine. We saw a pretty hectic start with, of course, the 0-1 spinning around on the opening corner. Thankfully, it didn't collect anybody really seriously. There were some cars that got a bit of damage coming out of that, well, but the 0-1 got the worst of it. But there was certainly a lot of silly incidents, I would say, is putting that nicely in the first half of this race. We also saw a really weird moment under full course yellow where, was it the 31 that was leading? Was it the Porsches that were supposed to be leading? You'll recall number 31 went out and went around the number 6 and the number 7 Porsches after they didn't immediately follow the directions of race control. Ultimately, the 31 was able to keep those spots that they gained, and this actually led to a pretty nice battle between the 31 and those Porsches before the 31 made a mistake going into turn 1, locked up, and gave up the lead. But regardless, it was some pretty good back and forth, I would say. We did see some good battles in GTD as well, coming down at the end of the race, and we did see a pretty interesting battle take place between the 2 Porsches that actually almost saw both of them wreck each other, but ultimately they escaped that unscathed and were able to both finish. I think overall, my expectations for Indy were low. I didn't think it was going to produce great racing, but I think I walked away with it fairly impressed and maybe looking forward actually to the 6-hour race that we're going to see there next year. So I'm going to put this one, oh man, I want to put it in the good category, but maybe it was just solid. No, I'm going to put it in good. I think it was a good race. I think we saw some good battles for the lead. We saw a pretty good battle in GTP, and we saw a pretty good battle in the GT classes as well. So it's going to be good in my books. Now, well, what do we have here? We have Petit Le Mans, the race that would decide the championship. Where does it land here? Now, it's worth noting that by this point in the season, the GTD Pro title was that was decided by the drop of the green flag. I believe the LMP3 class was, if it wasn't decided at Indy, it was decided at the drop of the green flag for this race as well. And then the GTD class, Paul Miller Racing they ran away with it. It was over at Indy for them. So we entered this race with only 2 championship battles to really pay attention to. There were 2 close ones, and the GTP battle was certainly very alive with 4 manufacturers and 4 cars still in the hunt for it. Well, it was more than 4 cars, but 4 cars had a pretty realistic opportunity to win. But we got into the race, and the number 6 Porsche that was in the hunt for the championship was taken out in kind of a silly incident involving an LMP2, caused a pretty big accident, and they were eliminated from championship and of course race win contention. And you know what, I think that's a pretty good way that sums up this race. There were so many silly incidents that led to full course yellows. In fact, there were 12 full course yellows in this race. 12 in a 10-hour race. I think that pretty well sums it up there. It's obviously, as a result of that, we didn't get to see really any strategy get to unfold over a long stretch of the race. Sure, maybe we saw some battles go on, but they were interrupted by full course yellows. It was just very difficult to get a real rhythm going in this race and develop some storylines to watch, and then ultimately, of course, the big talking point coming away from this race was the incident between the number 31 and the number 10 GTP cars and the crash that came from that. These 2 cars were racing for the championship. You're gonna race hard, and unfortunately, the championship was virtually decided there at this point. You know, the number 6 had been eliminated from contention. Now the number 10 was eliminated from contention as they were stuck in the barriers. The number 31, of course, also involved in that incident, but they got out of it and they were able to carry on. And there was a BMW that was still in the hunt, but they didn't really show great competitive pace all weekend. So really, this incident kind of summed up the championship. And I think at the end of the day, I love Petit Le Mans, but this race I just don't think was that great. It's not how I want to see the championship end. And for that race, I'm going to put it in the nah category. I think this had the potential to be one of the best races that we've potentially ever seen in the modern Imsa era. We saw so many manufacturers that were duking it out. The point standings were so close in GTP, this new golden era of sports car racing, and this was how the first championship kind of was decided. An unfortunate way to end the season, but I think overall the season was good overall. You see here we do have the one great race, the Rolex 24. You know, I was kind of deciding, like, do we put Road America up in that great category? But I think that's a good race, along with, you know, Long Beach, the Glen, Indy. Those were some good races. We had solid races at Sebring, although I didn't like the ending, and then of course at VIR for a nice GT only round of the championship. And then we had some races that were, you know, mediocre, CTMP. We just didn't really get to see any great flow, great rhythm develop, and we didn't get to see too many passes take place. And then Laguna Seca as well, just kind of a rhythm issue. That's maybe kind of a trend that we're seeing with some of these races that are just a little bit below the solid bar. And then there were a couple of races, there's always going to be a couple of races that, you know, probably not going to be a huge fan of. Lime Rock Park, we just didn't get to see the passing develop. And then Petit Le Mans was just it was just always interrupted. We didn't get to see anything develop, just a bunch of incidents take place, and that was kind of unfortunate to see. But overall, what do you think? Like I said, I think that this season was a success. I think overall this was, if I had to put this overall IMSA season onto this tier list, then I think I would put it in the good category. I mean, there were considerably more races that are solid and above than there were that were in those lower buckets, so I think that signals immediately a successful season, right? Regardless though, I want to know what you think. You can go to the link in the description below and you can make this list yourself. Take a screenshot of it, tag me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I want to see what you guys think. And in case you can't remember all the major moments from this Imsa season, you can go and check out this playlist with all of the race recaps for every race this season. Once again though, a big shout out to all the Patreon supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offintheesses. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.